Hi guys, I'm Big Mike, and like always, I'd like to thank you for being here today. Today we have Dr. Brett Steenbarger here to talk about improving trading performance. And Dr. Brett is actually, it's a real honor to have Dr. Brett on BMT. He's actually one of the most favorite authors that we have on the site. Myself in particular, I really loved the book, The Daily Trading Coach. It's my number one most recommended book for anybody that wants to improve their trading. So it's an absolute honor to have Dr. Brett here today. Today he wants to talk about a few things. I've got some bullet points here. Turning trading into a performance activity, characteristics of successful traders, under-controlled versus over-controlled trading, patterns of poor trading, common behavioral triggers, diffusing and managing problems, as well as maximizing strengths. Because this webinar is part of BMT's 5-year anniversary, we're going to be giving away 10 autographed books at the end of the presentation. In order to have a chance to win one of those books, you're going to want to take notes on Dr. Brett's presentation today, because the questions at the end of the webinar will be directly related to the material that he's covering today. I also want to point out that anyone that's joined this webinar from Dr. Brett's website directly, in order to win one of the books, or if you're a winner of one of the books, I will be asking for your BMT username. If you don't have one, it's free. You can go to bigmiketrading.com and register so that you're ready at the very end. And that's so that I can get in touch with you once the webinar is done. I'll get your mailing address, I'll get your autograph request, and then we'll get the book into your hands if you're one of the 10 winners. I also want to remind everybody the webinar is being recorded. I'll post the recording on YouTube sometime tomorrow. Dr. Brett has asked that we hold the questions until the end of the presentation, and there will be an extensive Q&A at that point. So just try to hold them until then, and then we'll get through as many questions as we can. All right, guys, with that, I'm going to turn things over to Dr. Brett right now, and we'll get started. Okay, you should have the option to share your screen again one more time. Okay, we've got the PowerPoint. It looks good. All right, it's all yours, Brett. Thanks.
Okay, very good. Sound okay?
Sounds good, and we see everything well. Thanks.
All right. Okay, very good. Okay, well, I appreciate the interest, and it's a great honor to be able to present today. We're going to be talking about a few aspects of improving trader performance. But before I get started, let me just emphasize on this title screen my email address, thesteenbab@aol.com. If any of you have questions that don't get answered during our session, please feel free to be in touch with me, and I'll do my best to answer those questions. I'm not able to do formal coaching online, but I'm always happy to answer questions, clarify, and help traders in any way that I can. And of course, you see the URL for the Trader Feed blog, which contains articles relevant to what we'll be discussing today. So let's get started, and let's start at the very beginning and talk about what makes any activity, including trading, a performance activity. There are several factors that differentiate a performance activity from any routine activity that we would undertake. There has to be discretionary decision making. In other words, we are using our judgment to make decisions about what we are doing. If we completely automated something and had no control over it, then for us it would not be a performance activity in the same way as if we are utilizing our judgment. But beyond utilizing judgment, there is also the importance of measurement of results. that once we make decisions, we are tracking outcomes, how well we are doing what we are doing. Moreover, we're getting some kind of feedback about our performance, what we're doing well, what we're not doing so well. So we're getting process feedback at the same time that we are getting outcome feedback from those results. So we're making decisions, getting feedback about how we're doing what we're doing, getting feedback about the results of what we're doing, and then we are taking those results and that feedback and moving it forward to set goals so that we can improve our future decision making. This is what I refer to in my trainer performance book as a learning loop. The goal setting and the efforts at improvement take the feedback from past performance and apply the lessons learned to future performance. If we think about athletic activity, if we think about the training of championship chess players, we see these elements. We see discretionary decision making, tracking of process, measurement of results, and systematic efforts at improvement. That turns an ordinary activity into a performance activity where we are dedicated to improving performance over time. Many of you will recognize the concept of deliberate practice as an essential part of performance activity. The practice is deliberate because it is informed by feedback and measurement of results. Okay, what are some characteristics of successful traders? You know, Jack Schwager in the Market Wizards books did some very good research and found that successful traders are quite different in their approaches to markets. They trade quite differently. Some are short-term, some are long-term, some are more directional, less directional. Are there any underlying characteristics that we see among traders who are successful? There's not a lot of research, published research in this area, but there are some indications both in the practice literature and in formal research. The first characteristic is known as conscientiousness. Conscientiousness refers to being organized, being thoughtful about what you do and how you do it, being structured in your approach to doing something. Being highly responsible is part of being conscientious. If you think about the kind of person that you would want to babysit your children, you would want a conscientious person, someone who takes responsibility in a very serious way. Low neuroticism, now the flip side of neuroticism would be emotional stability. So we're looking for people who have a relatively stable emotional outlook as opposed to a quote-unquote neurotic makeup where they are having many highs and lows depending on whatever might be going on at the time. And as you can imagine, the emotional stability contributes to stability of decision making. High openness. Openness to experience is a personality trait that is correlated with creativity. A person who is high in openness is someone who likes variety, someone who likes change, novelty. People who are low in openness prefer stability and routine. There are a couple of reasons why openness to experience may be correlated with trading success. First is that creativity aspect. The person who is open to new information, different information, may be more likely to generate successful trade ideas than someone who is locked into a static, routine set of information. But I think there's an additional factor as well. People who are high in openness to experience may be more willing to embrace the changes that occur within markets. You know, Victor Niederhofer talks about ever-changing market cycles. We have different periods in markets where the markets are trending, other periods where they're not trending. There are periods where markets are volatile, and other periods where they're not volatile at all. To adapt to those changes requires a certain degree of openness to change and variety that we might see in the openness to experience. And finally, what the research literature calls problem-focused coping. When something goes wrong in trading, how does a person cope with that? What we find among successful traders is that they cope by addressing the problem. If a trade goes wrong, maybe there's a problem with one's assumptions, maybe there's a problem with one's execution, but one becomes very problem-focused in terms of solving what may have gone wrong. That's very different from emotion-focused coping, where a person might cope by venting emotion, by suppressing emotion. The problem-focused coping ends up being more constructive and helpful to that learning and development process. These characteristics are relevant when we talk about two of the largest psychological challenges that traders face. And I refer to these as under-controlled versus over-controlled trading. We see under-controlled trading as impulsivity, a fear of missing moves, a need for action in markets. So people put on trades when there really is not objective opportunity present. The impulsive trader looks like an ADHD person, like someone who has an attention deficit. There's a loss of focus and a loss of rule governance. They stop following rules because they're behaving on the impulse of the moment. Now, when you understand the dynamics of under-controlled trading, you can see why the characteristics of conscientiousness and emotional stability, the low neuroticism, are so important. Someone who is conscientious is going to be more likely to stick to a well-crafted trading plan. And someone who has a high degree of emotional stability is less likely to be thrown in their cognitive processes by the ups and downs of P&L. Now, when we go from under-controlled trading on one hand to over-controlled trading, we move from being too impulsive to being too hesitant. The over-controlled trader, instead of trading too much when opportunity is not there, the over-controlled trader doesn't trade when opportunity genuinely presents itself. There's a fear of sustaining loss, a need for safety, there's a hesitation. The trader is behaving not like the ADHD person, but as an anxious person. Very often during episodes of over-control trading, attention becomes self-focused, and particularly focused on P&L and negative P&L. So that the self-focused attention ends up distracting the trader from what's going on in markets. Part of the trader, so to speak, is focusing on what's going on the screen, and part of the trader is focusing on what's going on internally and what's going on with P&L. this becomes a negative spiral because as attention becomes distracted and divided, bad trades are either made or very often good trades not taken. There's frustration over not participating in a move that one anticipated, and out of that frustration can come, excuse me, impulsive trades. So it's not so unusual that we would see a kind of oscillation between over-controlled trading and under-controlled trading, where the trader becomes over-controlled, fears loss, misses opportunity, then becomes frustrated, out of frustration becomes impulsive, takes bad trades, incurs further losses, which then in turn leads to further hesitation. Many, many emotional problems of trading boil down to these two dynamics of over-control and under-control. Now, a very, very important idea here is that patterns of poor trading, the patterns of under-control and over-control, are state-dependent. What does that mean? Our behavior is patterned, just like markets are patterned. We read patterns in markets. Our behavior is patterned in the sense that we behave in characteristic ways in particular situations. And these patterns recur through the lifespan. These patterns are typically associated with particular states that we are in. Physical states, emotional states, cognitive states. So that in one state, we may show a certain set of patterns of behavior, and we could show a very different set of behaviors when we are in different states. A good example, as I mentioned earlier, would be frustration. When we are highly frustrated, we are apt to act in ways that we would never entertain during calm moments. Now, a very important idea is that these states of consciousness, states of mind, states of body, are evoked by triggers. Typically, there will be events, internally and externally, that set off our patterns, that set off our shifts in state. Once we go from one state to another state, we begin to process information very differently. If I shift from a calm, focused state to a fearful state, suddenly I process market information in a different way, very much in that self-focused way that I mentioned earlier. That could be triggered by a losing trade. It could be triggered by thoughts of my P&L. We can have cognitive triggers, behavioral triggers. But the key idea here is that states, when they shift, typically are triggered by something. And that something is not always a factor that we're aware of. So what are some common triggers for state shifts among traders? Anxiety certainly is one of them. Any kind of fearfulness will set off different ways of processing market-related information. Guilt, self-recrimination. How many of us have been in a situation where we're just so frustrated with ourselves, we're angry at ourselves because we've made a mistake, we've done something wrong, we told ourselves we would never do that again, and so that feeling of guilt and frustration ends up triggering different behaviors. Boredom actually can be a very powerful trigger. People, they say nature abhors a vacuum. I think people abhor a vacuum as well, that when people are bored, they try to fill their experience with whatever is available, and sometimes that can become a reason for impulsivity. Fatigue is a common trigger. With fatigue, we typically lose focus, our concentration goes downhill. We also tend to have more mood swings when we are fatigued, and so that can become a trigger for processing information in very shifted ways. Anger and frustration, as I mentioned, where we might be angry at markets, we might be angry at those we think are manipulating markets, we may be angry and frustrated at ourselves, but all of that shifts us to a flight or fight mode in our body, in our mind, where we now process information radically differently. And finally, physical stimuli can be triggers. Physical stimuli from being hungry, being in pain if we have an injury, physical stimuli in terms of discomfort of our sitting position can be enough to lead us to enter a different state of mind, which in turn can be a trigger for different trading behaviors. So what do we do when we find ourselves being triggered, when we find that our best trading practices are not being followed and we are unwittingly sabotaging our performance? The first and most important thing that we can do is identify what our triggers may be. What is setting us off? Traders talk a lot about discipline and the importance of following their trading plans. The question is, why would someone spend the time and effort crafting a trading plan, doing the research, doing the work behind it, and then seemingly throw it out the window? It's not really self-sabotage. It's a shift in state. The trading plan was created in one frame of mind, in one state of consciousness. What we know, what we can act upon, is relative to the state of consciousness that we are in. Once we shift to a whole other state of mind and state of body, we lose awareness, we lose perspective of that plan. How many of us have had the experience of placing a trade, losing on the trade, and then at the end of the day review, we go through our charts, we go through the trades, and we ask ourselves, how in the world did I place that trade? What in the world was I thinking of? That's because the state of mind in which you were doing your preparation was different from the state of mind that you were in when you made the trading decision. Something triggered that shift. And so above and beyond all of the strategies that I'll be presenting is the importance of self-awareness and learning to recognize what your patterns are, your triggers, what typically sets you off. And it may be a frustration factor that could lead to overtrading, the under control. It could be anxiety and fear that would lead you to be over-controlled. It could be fatigue from being on overload. You want to identify the state of mind and body and thought that is associated with your best trading and with your worst trading mistakes. So how can we change these triggers? How can we alter our patterns? I'm going to present several strategies that have been documented in their effectiveness in the psychology research literature. The first of these techniques is called exposure. In exposure methods, you are learning literally to decondition your emotional triggers. This is used in the treatment of traumas and the treatment of anxiety disorders. The way that works is we create what's called a hierarchy. We create a list of situations starting with the least frustrating or the least stressful, the least difficult, and moving up to the most difficult and challenging, the ones that would be most likely to set us off. So let's say we have 15 scenarios arranged in a hierarchy from very moderately stressful, very modest in their ability to trigger us, all the way through moderate ones, through very highly stressful scenarios that almost always would trigger us. We create the hierarchy, and then during our work on ourselves, we begin at the bottom of the hierarchy and we apply some very basic coping skills. The most basic coping skill that I use in working with traders is controlling your physical state and your cognitive state simply by focusing your attention and slowing and deepening your rate of respiration, your breathing rate. So what you're doing is closing your eyes, imagining a situation, and in the beginning for the coping exercise, you would imagine a relaxing situation, maybe walking in a forest or on a beach. And while you are imagining this vivid scenario, you're breathing very, very slowly, very, very deeply. So you're slowing down your body at the same time that you're focusing your mind. And that takes some practice. And typically when we do exposure work, people will just practice keeping mind and body in control through a number of practice sessions. So before you work on your triggers, you learn how to get yourself calm and focused. Once that happens, we move to what's called imaginal exposure. Exposure using imagery. Exposure means we expose ourselves to the very situations that we find stressful. So in the beginning, when we were doing the coping exercise, we were imagining ourselves wandering on a beach on a sunny day. But now, when we begin the exposure work, we imagine the first item in our hierarchy, the first scenario that is very mildly stressful. And we play a movie in our head. We imagine ourselves in that situation. We visualize ourselves and what is happening in markets and what we would be thinking and doing and how we would respond. We are rehearsing that situation in imagery while we continue to breathe slowly and deeply and keep ourselves chilled. So think about what's happening psychologically here. You are pairing two different things, a stressful situation that in the past has triggered you with physical calm and cognitive focus. Now normally, something that is stressful would make you unfocused cognitively and would rev you up physically. That's what the flight and fight response is all about. In this deconditioning work, when you reprocess your triggers, you are learning to undo the flight or fight response. You are learning to stay chilled even when you are vividly imagining situations that had triggered you. Those rehearsals need to be intensive and frequent. Repetition is what makes this technique work. And once you become completely calm, completely chilled at the lowest level of your hierarchy, then you move to the next scenario that you laid out, and to the next one, and to the next one, until you're imagining your worst case scenarios, the ones that always frustrate you, and you're repeating them again and again and again with imagery and keeping yourself calm and focused. That is called imaginal exposure. By the time you get through your hierarchy, you've had plenty of practice keeping yourself calm and focused, so that by the time you are in the real world and putting on trades, and some of these trigger situations are now happening in real time, you can take a few deep breaths and focus your attention and bring yourself to a very calm place where you're more likely to make the decisions that you had planned during that state earlier. When you start using the breathing and the cognitive focus in real time, that's known as in vivo exposure. So you're going from gradual hierarchies to real-life situation. And in fact, you could do that in a gradualistic way by moving from the imaginal exposure to using in vivo exposure with simulated trading, and then move from simulated trading to trading small size, and then bumping up your risk as you master these situations emotionally. Very powerful technique. It is the most effective technique in the research literature for anxiety-related disorders and for the reprocessing of stress and dealing with post-traumatic stress, and gives us a degree of control over situations that formerly had made us lose control. Strategy number 2, shifting your state. Now, what this requires is what I call, in my book, taking your emotional temperature. In fact, with some traders I work with, I actually print out a sheet with a thermometer on it. And during the trading day, they have to label on the thermometer how hot their emotions are. That's taking your emotional temperature. And of course, what you're doing with an exercise like that is working on becoming more self-aware. We want to be mindful. We want to be aware of the states we're in. If you don't know what state you're in, how can you make a conscious effort to shift that state? Now, once we take our emotional temperature and we recognize in real time that we are frustrated or we are bored, then we take active measures to activate a complementary state or activate a non-emotional state. So you are purposely engaging in an activity that is counter to the state that you're in and that could trigger poor trading. So a very simple example would be if you felt bored and markets are slow and nothing is happening, and it's a situation where you've been tempted to put on positions just to stay involved. A complementary state might be pumping yourself up by doing some short-term vigorous exercise, physical exercise. Activating a non-emotional state, let's say you were frustrated and worked up, perhaps you could do a short meditation exercise off the desk where you put yourself in almost like a trance state where you are very self-aware but very slowed down. With some traders, I've used biofeedback for emotional training. And as most of you know, biofeedback is a method where people receive direct and real-time feedback about the state of their bodies. So biofeedback can measure things like skin temperature, it can measure things like heart rate, muscle tension. There are a number of good heart rate related biofeedback measure devices out there. And what's interesting about them is that they can be used to control stress, but you can use them to shift your state, to learn how to stay focused and calm. There's a unit called Stress Eraser that I've used most recently, very portable, small electronic device. And basically to get yourself to a point where you control your heart rhythms, you have to maintain very regular breathing, which in turn requires you to focus on your breathing. So it becomes a training device for entering a state that would counter the state which has triggered poor trading behavior for you. Strategy 3, I call solution focus. It's based on the solution-focused methodologies in counseling and therapy. And here, instead of focusing on problem patterns, in other words, instead of focusing on your episodes of under-control trading or your episodes of over-control trading, you are finding exceptions to those problem patterns. So, the question from a solution-focused vantage point would be, when are you trading in the zone, so to speak? When are you not under-controlled? When are you not over-controlled? When do you have optimal control where you are immersed in what you are doing and where your ideas, your perceptions, and your plans come to you? Well, most traders have had episodes where they're not under-controlled or over-controlled, where they're relatively in the zone. They may not be able to sustain those, but most people know what it's like to be absorbed in what they're doing and not frustrated and not fearful. So we start to look for the triggers behind those exceptions. Just as negative problem patterns can be triggered, our positive patterns very often have a trigger as well. So now, if we understand our positive triggers, we can create models of our desired behavior, how we want to be trading, and we can identify the specific triggers and the specific states that we're in when we are in our zone. So, for example, for me, a trigger for positive trading would be the time period right before the market opens and right before I begin trading to be very distraction-free and to be in a very open-minded place where I am observing markets, but no longer in a planning mode and no longer in really a doing mode. Really, I'm absorbing what's coming from the screen. That's a very different state for me than the state where I am actively researching or the state where I'm managing the risk of a large position. To me, it feels more like a Zen state where I am very quiet, very focused, and just observing and in the mode of letting the market come to me, letting patterns come to me, rather than being in the mode of trying to figure out what the market is doing and impose my views on the market. Now, for other people, they would have other states and other triggers, but what I find is that the quiet of my physical environment ends up being an important trigger for my cognitive quiet, so to speak, which then helps me stay with a pattern of desired behavior. So the focus is not on eliminating overtrading or undertrading. The focus is on staying in that zone of optimal decision making. Strategy 4, maximizing your strengths. And this gets back to Jack Schwager's work. What he found is that successful traders are all very different, but one thing they share is that each of them has a very distinctive personality and a very distinct set of personality-related strengths and cognitive strengths, and they find a way to engage markets that make use of their signature strengths. This is a very important concept because it suggests that the way to be successful is not simply to imitate someone else, but rather to draw upon your particular strengths, emotionally, cognitively, interpersonally. So for instance, some portfolio managers I work with have tremendous analytical abilities. They are great at processing lots of information, digging into that information, and sifting it and finding nuggets. And sure enough, when they are successful in trading, they're making use of those analytical skills. There are other portfolio managers I work with who really don't like reading research reports and sifting through data. They end up processing information in very interpersonal ways, discussing with people. They develop a network of colleagues, and they very much develop ideas by bouncing from person to person, and they become as good at reading other people as they are reading markets. It's a very different set of strengths. What's important is that your strengths anchor your best practices, that how you trade becomes an expression of who you are. So in that situation, you're avoiding the emotional disruptions of trading by anchoring yourself in what you are good at doing. So often, trading slumps occur the same way that batting slumps occur in baseball. People begin to doubt themselves and they start to alter their swing, or the pitcher will alter their pitch. And traders will alter how they approach markets. They'll lose confidence and they get away from doing what they do best. In order to be consistent in implementing your strengths, you want to turn best practices into best processes. You want to create routines for your trading that draw upon your particular strengths. Well-being, I put down as a core strength because, as Barbara Fredrickson's research at Chapel Hill suggests, when we experience significant well-being, we process information more deeply and more broadly. Many times, traders are not processing market-related information effectively because they don't have enough of the positive experience in their lives to balance the natural and unavoidable stresses of what they do in markets. Well-being incorporates everything from our social life, our romantic life, our individual interests, how much gratification, how much satisfaction we are deriving from the events in our life. If you understand this idea of well-being as a core strength, then you'll realize that the person who lives for their trading, they're 24/7, they're focused on markets, and they're the loudest in declaring their passion for trading. Those end up being among the most vulnerable traders because we all go through drawdowns. We all make mistakes. We all have periods of losses. And if that's your whole life, if you have no other sources of emotional well-being other than markets, then what's going to happen? Your moods, your energy level will rise and fall with your P&L. And you'll be vulnerable to those twin problems of over-control and under-control. Ultimately, as I say, training is the best therapy because when we train ourselves, we can become more rule-governed and we can build our cognitive capacity to process information in a heightened state of awareness and focus. Training means practice. It means what we talked about in the beginning, making your trading a performance activity, continually getting feedback about what you're doing and how you're doing it, continually monitoring your results so that you can identify clearly what am I doing right that is working for me and what am I doing that needs to be improved. So you're continually formulating positive goals, the positive trading behaviors you want to continue, and you're formulating goals for improvement. That turns ordinary trading into performance training. So, a couple of conclusions. First, developing ourselves as traders means developing ourselves as people. That in training ourselves to make optimal decisions under conditions of risk and uncertainty, in training ourselves to master the inevitable emotions of fear and greed and frustration and fear, we develop ourselves. And that self-development reverberates to other parts of our lives. In mastering our emotions in trading, we become better at mastering ourselves in the emotional situations in family life, in outside careers. So we are always working on markets and understanding markets, and we're always working on ourselves and understanding ourselves. We become exquisitely aware of market patterns. We become exquisitely aware of our patterns. We're always working on those two paths. And finally, the conclusion, you succeed by becoming more of who you already are. You already have certain cognitive strengths, certain emotional strengths. If you are going to be successful in financial markets, you are going to find a way of leveraging those strengths to identify and exploit objective opportunity in the marketplace. So instead of trying to make yourself into a different person, you're trying to identify who you are at your best so that you can apply those strengths to the processes of trading. Well, I managed to do it in under an hour. And you know what that means? That means there is more time for questions and discussion and application, because I really wanted to leave a good amount of time to apply these ideas to people's interests and situations as much as possible.
Right. Well, thank you very much, Brett, for the great presentation. So, guys, you can go ahead and start typing your questions. We'll spend some time on Q&A before we go to the book giveaway. All right. So as the questions are coming in, Brett, I had a question of my own. Can you tell me which, I mean, you have 3 books, right? And which one do you hear the most about? Which one do people contact you most often and say, I love this book? Is there one that stands out?
Yeah, it's a good question, and it really stands out differently for different traders and different trader needs. Traders who are interested in psychology and understanding themselves from a psychological vantage point, I think, like that first book on trading psychology. The second book has really appealed to traders interested in developing themselves, particularly beginning and early career traders who are interested in supercharging their learning curves. So the second book on enhancing trader performance really focuses on developing yourself as a trader as opposed to the psychological experience of trading, which is more the psychology of trading, the first book. The third book, The Daily Trading Coach, is a kind of cookbook of psychological techniques. In fact, I present 101 techniques that traders can use for different kinds of situations. And so as a self-help reference specific to trading, some traders have found that particularly useful. So it really depends on a particular trader's situation and needs and interests.
Right. Yeah, like I said at the top of the webinar, the Daily Trading Coach was the one that really stood out for me. But, I can totally understand that it depends on each individual and maybe where they're at in their journey, what's going to speak to them the most at that particular time.
Yes, and in general, different authors will speak to different people, and it's not one size fits all. And if you go through the Trader Feed blog and go through enough entries, you will see a variety of topics related to performance as well as related to markets, and you can get a sense for whether that material speaks to you.
Right.
And that's probably the best way of initially encountering the material I've written.
One more question before I start reading the user questions.
Sure.
So for 5 years, I've kind of been preaching, if you will, to members on the site saying, hey, you guys really should pay more attention to psychology. And it's tough. There's a lot of people that push back on that, and I can understand. I actually used to be one of those people. I've been trading for almost 20 years, and it wasn't until, a few years ago that I really started to embrace the whole psychological part of trading. And, prior to that, I kind of considered it mumbo jumbo, so I can kind of relate to that. I'm wondering, what, for anybody that maybe is in this webinar or anybody that doesn't really believe that focusing on psychology as opposed to focusing on what a lot of people would call methodology.
Yes.
What is your advice to those people?
Yeah, again, a good question, and my take on this is probably a bit surprising given that I'm a clinical psychologist by training and a trader coach who works with hedge fund portfolio managers and prop traders. Psychology becomes particularly relevant once one has a successful methodology with edge. If a person is trading randomness, they can employ all the psychological insight in the world and all the greatest techniques, and it's not going to make them money. If people could make money simply by being disciplined, then every computerized trading system would be profitable, and it's not. You need to have an edge in the marketplace. You need to understand market behavior. You need to spend the screen time, the study time, the research time to understand those market patterns.
Right.
Once that happens, the implementation is very much affected by psychology and by some of the forces that we talked about here today. So it's not an either-or. Either methodology is important or psychology is important. But the two really have to work in concert, particularly once you have a sound methodology. Psychology will help you implement that in a consistent way, but also in a flexible way.
Right.
I think what helps traders appreciate the value of psychology is practical experience. They, like me, have made all the trading mistakes in the book. And you get to the point where you realize that you're unwittingly getting in the way of your own success. And I think for a number of traders, that's when a light bulb goes off, that the psychological component makes sense for performance reasons, which is why many Olympic athletes, for example, will employ psychological methods as part of their training.
Yeah. You know, I mean, just looking at a daily basis, kind of like the 10,000-foot view, looking at the site, and there's a lot of people that have journals, which is fantastic. But what I see
Yes.
happen over and over again, I mean, thousands of times over the 5-year period, is that people focus on methodology. They focus on entries and exits. They focus only on that, right? And
Yes.
they'll journal it, which is great. That's already better than not journaling it. But let's say they do this for 2 weeks or 2 months or whatever it is, and it's not working. And by the way, you know this, but the way most people measure whether it's working is from P&L. And so they make a decision, okay, this isn't working, so I'm going to change. So now they have a whole new methodology. And they kind of repeat this behavior, you know, numerous times. And this journal is, you know, 10 pages long, 50 pages long, 100 pages long. And they never seem to connect the dots between, I guess, the type of psychology I would maybe refer to it as is like behavioral, you know, what they're doing with regards to changing their method all the time. I still think that's psychology, but you know, a lot of people need some convincing with that. They don't agree. So I just want one more. I'm just trying to help these people because I see this is the biggest problem that I see on the site. This is something that everybody suffers from. Yeah.
Yes, I think you're making a great point. Well, I would use an analogy. Let's consider a different performance field. Let's say that you are going in for surgery, and your surgeon changes his methods every few days or weeks and gets frustrated when something doesn't work with a patient and then tries something different.
Yeah.
How would you feel about going under surgery with that individual? Well, of course, you would recognize that as a fertile field for malpractice. Well, why is it any different in the financial realm? Once you have something that back tests, something that has worked for you in an extended period of simulation, you have something solid, then you track performance over time, and large variations of performance are either due to changes in markets are behaving differently than during the period where you developed your methods, or are due to something changing in you, more of the psychological factors. When people change their methods frequently, of course they're not giving themselves enough experience to really see whether those methods are working or not. They're just assuming that random variation in performance is a sign that a method doesn't work. And so that's really an expression of frustration. If you're changing your methods frequently, you're frustrated. And as you point out, that becomes a psychological issue. You wouldn't want that in your surgeon. It's no more helpful in training.
Okay. All right. Let's see. Cindy wants to know, would you consider a trading room to be a distraction? So like a service that you would subscribe to.
Read that again.
Yeah, so basically like a trading room service that, you know, some people subscribe to these rooms. Would you consider that to be a distraction?
Very good question, Cindy. And I think for some people it would be, and for others not. You know, I mentioned for my own trading that I need that time to be in more of a Zen mode. If I were in a chat room, if I were listening to other people or interacting with other people during that time, I would find it tremendously distracting, and I know I would perform quite poorly. Other people are different. I do think a trading room or chat room can have value even apart from the moment-to-moment trading. In other words, imagine a situation where people are doing their own trading and are focused on their own markets, but then come together at a point in time to discuss the markets, to discuss their performance, to share ideas. I think that can be very useful. But we are all different in our cognitive styles and our cognitive needs, and what would be distracting and difficult for one person may not be for another. It's really a situation where you have to know yourself. The more you are relying on being immersed in markets, synthesizing information, putting patterns together, the more potential distraction there would be in real time from chatter around you.
Okay. So John is asking a question. Earlier in the presentation, you were saying something along the lines of traders that are the most vocal or the most maybe passionate or emotional perhaps about their trades are also the ones that are most at risk. And John says that isn't it that passion that, you know, actually makes them successful or gets them through it? What do you say about that?
Well, you know, I work with some very, very successful traders, and they certainly are passionate about what they do. And I routinely get up at 4 in the morning, if not earlier, to work on markets. And I think you could only do that if something passionately meant something to you. What I was referring to was the trader who makes trading their whole life, who trading isn't an important part of their life or simply a passionate part of their life. It becomes their life. They become all consumed with their trading. And so it crowds out other potential sources of well-being. It interferes with the formation of relationships. It interferes with physical development. And so all of that person's psychological eggs are in one basket. And that's a very vulnerable place to be. What I was saying was that that kind of single-minded focus, putting all of the psychological eggs in one basket, is often justified by saying, well, it's my passion.
Right.
But a passionate interest in trading does not have to be reflected in an unbalanced life. Having life balance and multiple sources of well-being can keep us aloft in our passions, especially during periods of drawdown.
Right. I can't remember where I read it, but I think someone said that you shouldn't get your thrills from trading. You know, if you need something thrilling in your life, it's better to, you know, go jump from a plane or, you know, skydive or do something, right, to get that excitement instead of having it come from your trading.
Yes, yes, and I think that's a great point. I remember Linda Raschke, who I admire quite a bit, making a statement like that. And I would distinguish between a passion for markets and a passion for trading. Because when you have a passion for markets, when your interest is in understanding markets, then you have something to sustain you even when the trade is not there. People who have a passion for trading are all too prone to what I call addictive trading. Mm-hmm. And that's a recipe for overtrading.
Joe is asking, he says that you mentioned a site called Stress Eraser for the biofeedback. He says that site looks to be shutting down in July. Do you have any other suggestions for someone that wants to take a look at the biofeedback devices?
Well, that's interesting. I wasn't aware of the, I know the devices are available for sale on Amazon as well as from the company. I wasn't aware that it's shutting down, but thanks for alerting me to that. There are other monitors, biofeedback monitors. There's a company called HeartMath, Heart and then Math, M-A-T-H, that does some work in this area that might be worth looking into. But let me check that out. I may put something on the blog.
Okay. Max wants to know if you think it's possible to be over-aware of one's self during trading.
Yeah, a good question, and that's part of what I was mentioning with respect to self-focused attention. During trading, you want to be focused on markets. You don't want to be thinking positively about yourself. You don't want to be thinking negatively about yourself. You don't want to be thinking about yourself. It's not about you. It's about understanding how markets are moving, why they're moving, and recognizing those patterns. And those might be fundamental patterns, those might be technical patterns, they may be statistical patterns, but we, to the extent that we are self-focused, our attention toward markets is divided. Some interesting research on pattern recognition that suggests that we are most able to recognize patterns when we are in an absorbed state of awareness, in that zone. And so I think we can be so self-aware and self-conscious that we are no longer absorbed and no longer able to extract the patterns that are playing out in front of us.
Right. There's several people asking for like a specific, I don't know, let's call it a template or maybe like an Excel worksheet. Do you have anything along those lines that you've maybe designed over the years that would help people measure themselves or to, try to find a solution to a certain problem, like you covered in some of the strategies?
The closest thing that I have to a template would be the Daily Trading Coach book and the techniques in that book. Now, certainly one could map out any of those techniques as a series of steps and make it more formulaic, more template-like. But in the coaching work I do, I very much try to adapt methods to the specific needs of traders. And so I tend not to be focused on one size fits all, so to speak.
Right. Okay. Javier is asking, do you believe that there's like one guiding principle that that traders have? I know that Jack Schwager mentioned this and you mentioned what he mentioned, but do you agree with what Jack says, or do you think that it's really, it's too varied to say there's any one thing?
Yeah, maybe we could reframe the question. One guiding principle, you mean guiding principle of success?
Right, yes.
I would say that if there are guiding principles, it would be that successful traders show some kind of aptitude for trading related skills relatively early in their lifespan, which suggests that they have basic talents. They acquire an interest in markets relatively early in their lives, which gives them a longer learning curve. And they have some of those distinctive strengths that I mentioned that they are able to apply to markets in a rather direct way.
Okay.
So I would say the common element is really a developmental process. If you look at top traders, rarely have they started their trading careers later in their lifespans. Rather, they acquire the interest early and are able to immerse themselves in markets when they don't have the demands of formal education and career and child raising and so forth.
Yeah, that raises an actually very interesting point. There was a recent discussion on the site where I brought up, in my experience, I've kind of noticed this divide between what I would frame as blue collar versus white collar people, in their careers prior to trading, and like a correlation as to their success as a trader. And it seems to me, and I could be wrong, but it seems to me that white collar, people that are typically not focused on manual labor, they're inside an air-conditioned office type of a job, or maybe they're an executive or a C-level position. They have a harder time being good traders, and it's usually, or at least in my case, it was because I'm not used to being wrong. They're not used to being wrong. They don't accept that very well. Whereas the opposite end of the spectrum, the blue collar, not to oversimplify this, They're
Yes.
more used to taking direction and following direction, and it seems like almost that they're better wired or have more experience in that area to be a better trader. What do you think about any of that?
Yeah, that's an interesting observation. I haven't really thought of that in blue-collar, white-collar terms thus far, although I know a number of very successful traders who have very blue-collar backgrounds. That being said, the research from Angela Duckworth on what she calls grit, which is the ability to persevere in the face of setbacks, the ability to endure failure and keep moving forward, I think is correlated with success across fields and is definitely something I have noticed among successful traders.
Okay.
That they are able to endure setbacks and learn from them and aren't devastated by them.
Okay. E-mini Trader has a really good question here. And okay, so, well, let me just read his question to start. So he says, is it better to use a spouse or some kind of a fellow trader to kind of act as like a sounding board for someone's trading? And I just want to kind of add to the end of his question, piggyback my own, what do you think about the overall importance of, I don't know if you want to call it emotional support or whatnot from like immediate family, and what type of, well, psychological impact it could have on you. Let's say, for example, if your wife doesn't support your trading. So do you think it's a good idea to use like your spouse as a sounding board, or is it too stressful, or what do you think?
Yeah, very interesting question. I think there's a very important role for the spouse. I'm not sure I would call it a sounding board. If I'm running multivariate regression equations and looking at the relative contribution of sentiment to forward price movement in the S&P, I'm not sure that my wife is going to have a lot of meaningful input in that analysis. But that's really a different kind of sounding board, something I would discuss with a trading colleague, than the emotional support factor. If I did not have the level of emotional understanding and support from my spouse that I have, there is no way I would have gone anywhere in my career, either as a psychologist or a trading coach or anything else. I do believe that Maslow had it right when he talked about a hierarchy of needs. And if your basic needs are not met in a romantic relationship, if there is conflict at home, I think it is very difficult to be optimally focused in one's personal development and career development. And so I do believe a spouse is extremely important to a trader's success, and it's extremely important for a trader to keep a spouse in the loop, what they're doing, how well they're doing. This gets into a touchy topic. Every year I encounter a number of traders who trade in a way that, again, I would label as addictive. They are trading impulsively. They are not trading with any objective edge whatsoever. They're over trading. They're taking large risks. And it really does take over their lives. And they begin to hide their losses and hide their activities from their spouse. At that point, trading is no different from a gambling addiction. And a spouse in that scenario is very vulnerable. And a spouse in that scenario may not be supportive of the trading because they intuit that it's not a performance activity or a professional activity.
Right.
It's an addictive activity.
Right.
And so I think it is important to empathize with the position of the spouse who has no control over the trading and yet whose financial security is very much impacted by the results of the trading, and make sure that the business decisions of trading and to go into trading and to expand trading are shared with the spouse just like any business decisions would be. If you were starting a restaurant, you would be sharing that information with the spouse and encouraging their support and involving them in a feedback loop. I think the same is true for trading.
Yeah, and anybody that wants to maybe read some discussion on that, there's a really good thread. You can do a search for "Time to Give Up." It was a really great discussion a while back. I had a question about the accountability aspect. Okay, so whether it's your spouse or a friend or just your own journal, preferably like one in public maybe, to enhance the accountability. What, in your mind, what is the importance of having that level of accountability when it comes to, improving yourself as a trader?
Accountability is huge. Accountability to oneself, that's what tracking results is all about, and making those improvements. That's a way of being accountable to yourself. But accountability also is important in the professional context. If you ever hope to be managing investor money, then accountability to investors is paramount. And you learn to be accountable to investors by being accountable to your own trading processes. So by being process-focused, by being results-oriented, tracking results in that performance way, we are accountable to ourselves and to our development traders, but we also position ourselves to be accountable to those who would invest with us.
Right. Josephine is asking, so if a person who is consistently diverging from his or her plan when it comes to taking losses or moving stops, for et cetera, what's the best thing to do to choose from one of the strategies that you listed? Which one should they focus on?
Yeah, I think the exposure methods would be particularly helpful to a trader in that situation. There can be other factors that could lead a trader to get away from their stops or get away from their sizing rules. I find the problem to be particularly common among traders with small portfolios that are putting pressure on themselves to make enough from their trading to make an independent living.
Right.
At the firms where I work, a trader who makes a 20% annual return is considered to have a very good year. And
Right.
if you're trading $500 million,
Right.
then a 20% year is indeed a good year. If you're trading $50,000, then that's not going to pay all the family bills.
Sure.
So what happens is traders push themselves to take too much risk for the size of their portfolio.
Right.
That puts too much pressure on the trading, which leads them to abandon their rules.
Yep. Yep. And especially in the futures side, which is the most of BMT audience is trading futures. We've got brokers out there encouraging, $5,000 accounts with this enormous leverage, with maybe $500 day trading margins on the ES. And we've got traders that are trying to pull off, $500 a day or more, $1,000 a day. So they want 10 or 20% of their account daily, and
Incredible.
Their risk is just pure insanity.
Yeah.
Richard is asking.
And of course, that's going to cause all sorts of emotional disruption, and no psychological techniques will help the trader the vastly over-leveraged trader.
Yep. Right. You got to be realistic, right? One of the most important things I ever found in my own trading was that I've got to set, it's important to have goals, but they need to be realistic goals. Richard is asking, so how do I apply these concepts when his biggest problem is simply getting the motivation to work on his trading skills?
Oh, that's interesting. A couple of possibilities. I'm really thinking this one through because there really are a few different possibilities here. One possibility is that trading is not meant for everyone. And if someone is having trouble recruiting the motivation to do something, is that activity truly speaking to them? So I think a real hard self-analysis is important because many times people keep climbing the ladder without thinking about where it's ultimately leading them. The second thing is that once in a while, psychological problems and significant psychological problems can interfere with trading. For instance, we know that 7 to 10% of the population in the United States experiences some diagnosable psychological disorder during the course of a year. I ran a counseling program in Syracuse, and sure enough, 10% or more of students ended up utilizing that service. We know that a significant portion of the population experiences anxiety disorders, mood disorders such as depression, and so it could be the case for some people that they're not finding the motivation to pursue their trading because of, let's say, a depression problem. The way you would know that is if you were having trouble sustaining motivation in other areas of life as well. If you're motivated in other areas and just not in trading, that's when I think the reflection about whether trading is the proper path for you makes sense. On the other hand, if you're having trouble sustaining motivation pretty much across the board in life, then you might want to entertain the possibility that this is a more general psychological problem and not something specific to trading.
Okay. Futures operator is asking, what would you say with, or say to someone with impulsive or hyperactive ADD, impulsive trading tendencies? Do you think it's a poor fit for trading, or is it still possible to overcome those weaknesses?
Yeah. In general, it's a poor fit. It doesn't mean it's impossible. It means that you're facing a headwind. And so if the first question would be, if there is a true attention deficit problem. Attention deficits, we encounter those with children in school, but they're just as common and prevalent among adults. If one has a clinically diagnosable attention deficit disorder, then getting the right kind of help for that could be important to success in any field that involves focus and concentration. And so that would be my first approach. I do think some of those biofeedback devices and techniques to help build one's focusing muscles can be helpful. But many of the best treatments for genuine attention deficits, whether they include hyperactivity or not, are medications.
Okay. Abby is asking a question about the 2 states of anxiety. She's saying that, are you indicating that there's really only 2 states of anxiety, one that leads to fear and missing opportunity, and the other, which is aggressiveness, that would lead to over trading? Or have you encountered traders out there that have succeeded in going from one of those states to more of a hybrid state, balancing the 2?
Yeah, and I don't see those as 2 different kinds of anxiety. I do see anger and frustration as being fundamentally different from fear and anxiety. However, yes, I think the idea that successful traders are emotionless traders is misguided. I work with very successful traders, and they certainly have a wide variety of emotions, and some of them quite strong at times. I think what happens is that they become quite good at recognizing their emotional states at the time they're occurring. So they develop a kind of self-awareness or mindfulness, and that allows them to place themselves in a different mode. The integration of those, so to speak, to me, is an optimal control, not an over control, not an under control, but an optimal control that results when you are in what the psychological research calls a flow state. If you Google flow state, you'll find research by a psychologist named Csikszentmihalyi, who examined states of consciousness where people are absorbed in what they're doing, and he found that those states are highly correlated with creativity and productivity. So the ability to sustain focus, to stay absorbed, ends up being, I think, a balancing element to those two control extremes.
Okay. So right now I'm reading questions from 30 minutes ago, and there's still over 100 questions, so just let me know how we're doing on time.
Okay, well, we're getting up on an hour, and my understanding is we wanted to do questions for the book giveaway, right?
Yeah, so you tell me, do you have time for more Q&A or no?
Yes, let's do a few more. I've been up since a little after 3 this morning, and so
Okay.
if I take all hundreds of questions, I'm sure I'll pass out, and then I will be truly under control. But let's take a few more, and again, if people have pressing questions and would like to email me, I'm certainly open to that.
Okay, so here's a question from Sal that I know a lot of people suffer from or have the same question. So how do you overcome the fear of going live after you've been on Sim for quite some time?
The way you overcome the fear of going live is by going live in very small size, and such a size that it really is inconsequential to your portfolio. So in the beginning, I would be trading the smallest possible size and just doing the same things I had been doing in simulation mode and getting comfortable with having a live P&L and with having risk on the table. And only when I reached the comfort level that I had achieved during simulation would I start to bump up the size. The key is making the risk-taking relatively inconsequential to one's account size.
Right.
If one's account size is so small that any risk-taking will be a significant chunk, then that's a different problem.
Sure. Kind of combining multiple questions into one, I see several people asking about automated or algorithmic trading, and over the years
Yes.
I've noticed a pattern of people that, I don't know, maybe let's just say that they have some issues with discretionary trading, whether they want to describe them as methodology or psychological, whatever. So now they've kind of taken on automated trading and say, hey, I can just tell the strategy what to do, and I can back test it, and I can prove it, and I can remove emotion from trading.
Yep.
What do you have to say to those group of people?
I love systematic trading. I respect greatly the people who do systematic trading, who do it well. I think systematic trading has its own sets of perils, but for certain people who are research-oriented and who can operationalize their research through programming, systematic trading can be a tremendous avenue for trading success. It's a classic example of what I mentioned in terms of leveraging one's strengths as a trader, because some people have tremendous research strengths and some people have strengths in terms of programming, and systematic trading is a great way of expressing those strengths. The problem with systematic trading is that it is so easy to overfit trading systems, to tell the computer to run one test after another test after another test, one variation after another, until you find something that quote-unquote works. And even when you're doing in-sample and out-of-sample testing, it's very easy to find things that look like they work but end up being random. Some interesting work in this area by David Bailey and Marcos Lopez de Prado. If you go to the website quantresearch.info, you'll see some of that work. I respect their work tremendously, but one of their recent research papers outlines how easy it is to derive a false sense of confidence in backtests. So that's a different pitfall, but for some people, sticking with strong research and taking discretionary and emotional factors out of the equation can make a lot of sense.
Right. Speaking from personal experience, I think you summed it up best when you said that automated trading has its own set of pitfalls. Personally, I think it's easier to be profitable as a discretionary trader first, and then once you learn some of the ropes, if you will, you can start to apply some of those techniques to automated trading. But I guess everybody is different. Let's do one final question, and then we can move to the books. Okay, this kind of came from multiple people, phrased in different ways. So the question is basically, what do you think is the most common mistake that people make, and what is your advice on how to correct it, or what to do to solve that mistake?
The most common mistake people make, that one is relatively easy for me because I see it made so many times. It's putting your capital at risk before you're genuinely ready to in terms of your performance development. People trade because they want to make money, and they read a book, they see some chart patterns, and they think they're ready to make money. And that's not how any performance activity works. If you're going to make your living from playing golf, if you're going to make your living from being a creative artist, it takes a considerable developmental process of practice and learning skills and working on skills before you can entertain making any kind of living from the activity. I believe trading is exactly the same way. People put their capital at risk way too early in their development and then become frustrated and go through losses, put their families through losses, and don't respect the learning curve that's required.
Right. Okay. Well, Brett, I really appreciate all of your time.
And I'll just finish up with a little editorial comment. And that's a problem in the industry because not many people have a vested interest in telling traders they shouldn't be trading.
Right. Yeah.
The brokers aren't going to tell you that.
Yeah.
The idiots who are selling their wares, whatever, they're not going to tell you that.
Yep. Get rich quick. Yep.
Yeah. I mean, so everyone has a stake in the trader trading, but not as many have a stake in the trader developing themselves before they put their capital at risk.
Yep.
And I think that's a very important pitfall to avoid.
Yep. All right, man. Well, Brett, like I said, I really appreciate the presentation and the Q&A, and I hope that we can do this again one day. So now. That
would be great. We could get to some of the other questions as well and touch on other topics.
Yeah.
I joined the forum today, and so I'm happy to be
welcome aboard.
A member, an elite member.
Yeah.
So I'm feeling good.
There you go.
An elite member of the entity, so I'm looking forward to interacting with the community beyond this presentation.
Yeah, and it's an honor to have you. All right, let's give away some books. So guys, I'm going to read through 10 questions. We have 10 books to give away. They're going to be autographed by Brett. If you're one of the winners, I'm going to ask you for your BMT username. If you do not have that, please go get it right now. You can go to bigmiketrading.com, click on register. It's free. And I will need that because that is how I'm going to get in touch with you once the webinar is over to get your mailing address and to get your autograph request. All right, so there's 10 books. The way we do it is the first person to answer correctly for book number 1 will win the book. For the second book, we're looking for the second correct answer. By the time we get down to book number 10, we're going to look for the 10th correct answer. That way it's kind of fair for everybody, whether you're a fast typer, slow typer, or whatever. So let's get started. So the first question, I have a list here from Brett. So the first question, name 3 things that are necessary for turning ordinary discretionary trading into an organized performance process. All right, guys. Give me just 1 second. I see, as usual, you guys have made excellent notes. Brett, are you able to view the questions now or not?
I am seeing some things
Okay.
flashing before my eyes.
Yeah, I told you.
I'll need you to process those things because I'm
Yeah.
seeing it on a very reduced size screen.
All right, no problem. Yeah, there's hundreds of people typing answers all at once, so it can be a process. All right, guys. I'm wondering if can you see Neil's K? Do you see his answer?
Yeah, unfortunately, I'm not seeing. I'm seeing this very compressed screen, so unfortunately.
Okay. All right, let's just do this. I'm quite certain. So the answer is measuring results, setting goals for improvement, getting feedback from future performance to see if goals are met. And Niels K, I need your BMT username, please, and you'll get the first book. Okay, let me write that down. All right, book number 2, looking for the second correct answer. Why is conscientiousness helpful to trading success? As the answers fly by. Okay, so I believe the second correct answer, okay, so the answer is it enables a trader to stay process-driven and planned rather than reactive in markets.
Sounds like a winner.
Yeah, I hope I'm pronouncing this correctly. Kojava, I need your BMT username, please, for the second book. Just waiting for your username. Okay, that was easy. All right, book number 3, looking for the third correct answer. Why is openness important to trading success? Why is openness important to trading success? Okay, we've got the answer. So the answer is it helps a trader to adapt to changing market conditions. And Keith E, I need your BMT username, please, for the third book. Keith E. Okay. All right. Fourth book, looking for the fourth correct answer. What is a common trigger for under-controlled trading? Okay, so we got the answer. The answer is frustration, anger, boredom. Eugene B, I need your BMT username, please. Eugene, for the fourth book. Okay. All right, book number 5, looking for the fifth correct answer. What is a common trigger for over-controlled trading? Okay, we've got the answer. Fear, anxiety, worry, overanalysis. Josephine F, I need your BMT username, please. Josephine, for the fifth book. Okay, book number 6. Using imagery to rehearse following a trading plan during stressful market conditions is known as... Okay, looking for the 6th answer. You guys are picking a different one, so I'm still waiting for the 6th one, 6th correct one. So let me read the question again. Using imagery to rehearse following a trading plan during stressful market conditions is known as... Okay. I just got the 6th one. So the answer is exposure. Alan B, I need your BMT username, please. Alan B. Okay. All right, book number 7. Why is it helpful to take your emotional temperature periodically during trading? All right, you guys were on top of this one. All right, so the answer is to become self-aware and take action to return to the zone and prevent triggering of negative trading behaviors. Joe R, I need your BMT username, please, for book number 7. Joe R. Waiting for Joe's username. Come on, Joe. Okay. Oh, wait, that's not Joe. All right, Joe, I'm going to move on. Yes, it's you. I need your username. Joe Roma. Okay. All right, book number 8. What is this? What is a solution focus in trading? I see people strategically delaying their response so they can be number 8. All right. All right, so we got the answer. The answer, identifying positive trading performance and creating behavior patterns based on your success. Chuck E, I need your BMT username, please, for the 8th book. All right, book number 9. What are signature strengths? What are signature strengths? Okay, good job, guys. We got the answer. Just looking for the ninth. All right, so the answer is distinctive areas of talent and skill that anchor a trader's best practices. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. John B, as in boy. I need your BMT username, please. John B. All right, book number 10, final book. Why are many trading problems not psychological in nature? All right, guys, good job. So the answer, because traders may be trading patterns in markets without an edge, or might be trading in a way that does not draw upon their signature strengths. Sandra F, I need your BMT username, please. All right, guys, so congratulations on winning one of the 10 books. If you're one of the winners, I will be in touch with you in just a few minutes on BMT via private message. So you guys can check that, and then you can get back to me right away with your mailing address and your autograph request, and then we can get the books in your hands. Sandra F, I'm still waiting for your username. So while we wait, Brett, I just want to thank you again for all your time today, for the presentation, and especially for the Q&A, and for agreeing to autograph all these books. And also, since I'm in Ecuador, for agreeing to mail the books to the winners. I really appreciate it.
Okay. Well, thank you for having me, and I look forward to being part of the BMT community.
Thank you so much, Brett. All right, guys, I'll see everybody on the forum. I'll post the recording of this sometime tomorrow. Thanks, guys.
Have a good evening.
Thanks, Brett.